Brutal accident in Hamilton's pit lane during a practice session in Pirelli. Hamilton needed 20 stitches on his face. This is probably the first time you're hearing about this news, so I urge you to stay until the end before talking about it with your friends, because every detail matters. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The quiet, almost dreamlike early hours at the Pirelli test track in northern Italy were torn apart yesterday by a chain of events so astonishing, so utterly surreal, that even now the motorsport world is struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of the chaos that unfolded. In a setting meticulously designed for control, precision, and methodical preparation, all those ideals were vaporized in a single explosive moment that left the ground trembling and the very foundations of two of Formula One's greatest teams shaken to their core. The day had started with a sense of palpable energy. Mercedes had arrived with a steely determination, cloaked under layers of secrecy, transporting components in unmarked vans, assembling their setup like a covert military operation. Hamilton, a man known for his sharp instincts and even sharper hunger for glory, was at the center of it all. His W15, enhanced with secret modifications whispered about in engineering circles under the codename Blackfire, was said to possess aerothermal properties designed to outlast and outperform anything currently racing on the grid. Lewis's preparation was almost ritualistic. His engineers described him that morning as moving with an almost supernatural focus, exchanging minimal words, communicating through subtle gestures and nods rather than speaking. An eyewitness recalled seeing him standing by his car before the first run, eyes closed, whispering to himself words only he could hear. His race engineer, Peter Bonington, caught the last fragment over the headset. "Today, I become untouchable." Meanwhile, at the opposite end of the pit lane, Ferrari was orchestrating their own symphony of secrecy. Charles Leclerc had arrived at the facility 2 hours earlier than scheduled, his demeanor icy and unreadable. Having heard the swirling rumors of Sainz's impending movements and whispers of an internal power struggle at Maranello, Charles carried a heavy, invisible burden into the cockpit. His SF-24, updated with a radical new energy deployment system, dubbed Vortex Pulse, was Ferrari's secret weapon for Miami and beyond. Inside the Ferrari garage, tension was electric. Frédéric Vasseur, always a pillar of stoic authority, was pacing with uncharacteristic agitation. At one point, he pulled aside Charles's chief mechanic and hissed through clenched teeth, "We do not leave here second best. Not today. Not ever again." The collision that would later be described by one insider as a black hole swallowing reason itself did not occur at top speed down a straight, nor in the throes of a hairpin battle. It happened in a place meant for low-speed precision, during a pit exit drill, a simple exercise designed to test launch systems and tire temperature behavior under simulated race start conditions. Hamilton's launch was flawless, a masterpiece of reaction and torque control. The Mercedes accelerated with an almost violent elegance, each microsecond of throttle modulation executed to perfection. Engineers in the Mercedes pit were frozen, staring at the live data in reverent awe. One whispered, "Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. He's channeling 2020 again. It's terrifying." But as Hamilton surged forward, at the very same breath in time, Ferrari committed the critical error that would trigger the catastrophe. Their launch command for Leclerc was mistimed by a margin so microscopic it would barely register under normal circumstances, less than 0.4 seconds. Yet in the tightly compressed ballet of the pit lane, that sliver of miscalculation was fatal. Charles's SF-24 jolted forward aggressively, its rear squatting low, traction perfect. But as it entered the exit lane, it overlapped with Hamilton's trajectory by mere inches. Cameras later reviewed frame by frame showed that Hamilton, who by then was fully committed, had no visual on Leclerc until it was far too late. Impact. The sound wasn't a crash. It was a crack of doom, a seismic tear through carbon fiber, rubber, and dreams. Hamilton's car twisted violently, the rear end detaching with such force that shards of the diffuser embedded themselves into the sidewall of the pit lane barriers. Leclerc's front right wheel disintegrated on contact, sending splinters of carbon fiber hurtling across the asphalt like daggers. Inside the garages, chaos reigned. Radios erupted into panicked screams. Mechanics sprinted toward the pit lane, helmets abandoned, their faces frozen in horror. Someone inside the Ferrari camp reportedly fainted outright. At Mercedes, an engineer dropped his tablet and simply sat down on the floor, cradling his head in his hands. Toto Wolff, who had been observing from a secondary command center, was seen storming into the pit area, his face twisted in an expression of rage not seen since the Abu Dhabi 2021 debacle. He grabbed a radio headset from an assistant and roared. Full blackout. No footage leaves this track. I want legal here now. Meanwhile, Frederick Vasseur, his usual composure shattered, slammed a heavy wrench against the side of a tool chest, leaving a dent that will likely remain as a permanent scar of the day Ferrari's meticulous plans crumbled into dust. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. In the immediate aftermath, Hamilton extricated himself from the wreckage with a grimace of pain, limping slightly as he removed his cracked helmet. His first words, caught by a nearby microphone, sent chills down the spines of everyone who heard them. This wasn't an accident. Someone made this happen. Leclerc, still strapped into the crippled SF-24, pounded his fist against the steering wheel, shouting in a broken mix of English and Italian. You told me clear. Clear. There was a car there. Are you blind? Inside the medical bay, the atmosphere was suffocating. Hamilton, seething with fury, refused to sit down. Charles, visibly shaking, threw his helmet across the room so hard it cracked the cheap plastic molding of the corner wall. An unverified account claims that Lewis approached the partition separating them and, loud enough for Charles to hear, said, "Maybe next time, you look before you leap, golden boy." To which Charles allegedly retorted, voice hoarse with rage, "Maybe next time, stay in your damn lane, old man." The fallout began immediately. Engineers flooded the FIA with incident reports. Secret phone calls between team principals began to crisscross the Atlantic even before the sun had set in Italy. Within hours, an emergency summit was scheduled. Insiders described scenes of frantic scrambling at both Brackley and Maranello, emergency chassis rebuilds initiated, backup drivers placed on standby, legal teams preparing preliminary case arguments in anticipation of inevitable inquiries and protests. The wider world responded with sheer pandemonium. Footage of the impact leaked within 90 minutes, despite Wolff's desperate attempts to suppress it. Twitter erupted. #HamiltonLeclercGate began trending worldwide, fueled by grainy cell phone videos, wild theories of sabotage, and fans dissecting every single frame of the footage as if it were the Zapruder film. Pundits speculated that Ferrari's pit release software might have been tampered with. Others swore Mercedes had deliberately baited Ferrari into an aggressive launch. Petitions surfaced demanding full disclosure of radio communications. Celebrities and former drivers weighed in. Even Nico Rosberg, never one to pass on stirring controversy, posted a cryptic tweet. Some accidents aren't so accidental. #ThinkAbout. By nightfall, the sense of surreal disbelief had curdled into something much darker, deep bitter mistrust that would undoubtedly fester as the circus rolled into Miami. Hamilton, bruised but unbowed, reportedly told his inner circle, "If they thought they could break me before Miami, they just made the biggest mistake of their lives." And Charles Leclerc, boarding his private jet under a shroud of security, was heard muttering to his personal trainer, "I don't care if it's him, his team, or the whole FIA. They've declared war. Fine. I'm ready." The stage is no longer merely set for a Grand Prix. It is prepared for an all-out psychological battle, a collision of titans fueled not only by points and podiums, but by bruised pride, wounded honor, and an insatiable thirst for vindication. In the days to come, Miami will not simply host a race. It will bear witness to a reckoning. The collision between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc was not just an accident. It was a cataclysm, a rupture in the very heartbeat of the Grand Prix, an event so violent and so shocking that it felt as if the world itself had tilted off its axis for a few agonizing moments. The two machines, sculpted by hundreds of engineers over thousands of hours, met at precisely the wrong angle, a 32-degree nightmare that transformed precision engineering into a grotesque spectacle of destruction. The sheer violence of it defied logic. It wasn't simply a noise. It was a detonation, a ripping, shattering roar that tore through the pit lane like a thunderclap, sending a ripple of horror through every team member, journalist, and spectator within miles. The impact was immediate and absolute. Hamilton's front left corner burrowed itself into the vulnerable rear right of Leclerc's Ferrari with the merciless inevitability of destiny. It was not a tap. It was a spear thrust at 280 kilometers per hour. The carbon fiber did not crack gently. It exploded outward in a sharp, brutal spray of black shrapnel, sending splinters flying across the tarmac like tiny daggers. A constellation of sparks burst from the under trays as rubber vaporized and titanium ground itself into the asphalt. the screech loud enough to pierce through ear protection and shake the bones of those watching helplessly nearby. In the garages, it was as if a bomb had gone off. Tools clattered from benches. Screens flickered momentarily as camera feeds scrambled to keep up with the chaos. Mechanics sprinted toward the monitors, their radios crackling with desperate voices. Senior engineers yelled orders that nobody heard. In that split second, the race wasn't about points, podiums, or glory anymore. It was about survival. The Mercedes W15 was hurled into an uncontrollable spin, pirouetting violently counterclockwise, shedding pieces of itself like dying leaves torn from a storm-racked tree. The rear of the car struck the TechPro barriers with a ferocity that seemed to shake the earth itself. Parts tore free. The gearbox disintegrated on impact. The rear wing crumpled backward like tinfoil. The halo held, but the rest of the car looked more like the aftermath of a missile strike than a racing incident. Leclerc's Ferrari, meanwhile, staggered forward for a few desperate meters before yielding to its injuries. Its suspension collapsed, dragging along the surface, grinding metal on concrete. Leclerc sat frozen in the cockpit, his breathing shallow and rapid, his hands trembling visibly on the steering wheel. His helmet bobbed slightly with every ragged breath, his mind seemingly refusing to accept the disaster that had unfolded around him. Race control immediately deployed the red flags. Marshals swarmed the scene with an urgency usually reserved for fire rescues. Medical teams raced across the track. The FIA steward's booth exploded into a frenzy of shouted orders, frantic telemetry analysis, and panicked coordination. From the commentary box, the usually unflappable voices cracked under the weight of the moment. This is massive," one broadcaster whispered hoarsely, as if speaking louder might somehow make it worse. Hamilton emerged from the wreckage like a wounded soldier, staggering sideways, one hand clutching at his side where pain radiated with every breath. Marshals surrounded him instantly, but he pushed them away at first, pride momentarily overpowering common sense. His body betrayed him moments later, knees buckling. Medics caught him mid-collapse and lowered him gently to a stretcher. His helmet was removed, revealing a face twisted in anger, frustration, and raw agony. "Get me the footage," he rasped through gritted teeth, his voice hoarse but urgent. "I want to see it. I need to see it now." Inside the Mercedes Engineering Center, a scene of chaos unfolded. Screens showed real-time data loss. Tire degradation graphs, fuel burn charts, and brake temperature readings were rendered meaningless by the devastation now playing out live. Toto Wolff's fist came down hard on the table, scattering papers and coffee cups. He turned to the team assembled around him and barked, "We are not done. Find out everything. Everything." His voice was low, dangerous, seething with fury held barely in check. Meanwhile, at Ferrari, the atmosphere was suffocating. Leclerc had made his way to the team briefing room, still suited and helmeted, sitting rigidly in a chair. His eyes were wide and glassy. His race engineer, voice trembling slightly, tried to walk him through the sequence of events, frame by frame. "You didn't see him, Charles. You couldn't have seen him. It was too late." Leclerc stared at the screen, silent. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I turned. I didn't check. I felt him. I felt it through the seat before I heard it." No one had an answer. The paddock buzzed with theories. Some suggested Hamilton had been too aggressive, that he had lunged for a gap that was always going to disappear. Others insisted Leclerc had moved too late, that his defensive maneuver was reckless at best, suicidal at worst. Every former driver turned commentator had a different take, and none of them agreed. Heated debates broke out in media centers. Rival team principals exchanged pointed, thinly veiled jabs during interviews. Social media caught fire. Hashtags exploded across platforms. Hashtag pray for Lewis. Hashtag justice for Charles. Hashtag racing incident. Armchair analysts dissected onboard footage frame by frame, while professional pundits struggled to keep up with a tidal wave of public opinion swinging violently from one driver to the other with every new camera angle released. In the medical center, Hamilton lay on a hospital bed, ribs taped, neck braced. His physio stayed by his side, murmuring reassurances. He waved away the painkillers. His mind was racing faster than his battered body would allow. A senior FA doctor leaned in close and said softly, "Lewis, you need to rest. Miami is soon. You have to be smart about this." Hamilton turned his head slowly, his eyes burning with defiance. "Tape me up," he whispered. "I'm racing." Back at the track, rumors ran wild. Mick Schumacher was spotted in the Mercedes hospitality unit, triggering a frenzy of speculation. Stoffel Van Dorn was seen boarding a flight to Miami just hours later. Would Hamilton sit out? Would Mercedes gamble on a replacement? Team insiders leaked conflicting stories to different media outlets, fueling a bonfire of uncertainty that refused to die down. The night stretched on, but the drama only intensified. In a hastily arranged press conference, Wolff stood before a sea of flashing cameras, eyes steely. "Lewis is a warrior," he said. "If he says he will race, he will race. And God help anyone who tries to stop him." Meanwhile, Ferrari team boss Fred Vasseur offered a different perspective. "Incidents happen. This is racing. But we must be honest. Mistakes were made today. Serious mistakes." His words hung heavily in the humid night air, an unspoken accusation neither directly aimed nor entirely deflected. Drivers weighed in with caution. Verstappen, asked for comment, gave a tight-lipped smile. "I've had my share of run-ins with both of them. Let's just say, it was bound to happen sooner or later." Alonso, ever the provocateur, quipped, "If you race like lions, sometimes you bleed." As dawn approached, the paddock was eerily quiet, but the unease lingered like smoke after a fire. Everyone knew something had shifted irrevocably. Trust was broken. Rivalries were inflamed. The championship wasn't just a contest anymore, it was a battlefield, and the first shot had been fired with devastating clarity. Miami loomed on the horizon like a gathering storm, and somewhere in a darkened hotel room, Lewis Hamilton lay awake, staring at the ceiling, a storm brewing behind his bruised, unblinking eyes. The war for the championship had begun, not with strategy, not with subtlety, but with a crash so ferocious that it would echo through the season, and perhaps through history itself. The paddock was frozen in a strange kind of suspended reality after the collision. It wasn't just the noise of carbon fiber breaking apart or tires shrieking against asphalt that unsettled everyone. It was the sudden, brutal silence that followed, as if the entire universe itself held its breath for a moment. You could almost feel the air thicken, electric and volatile, as Marshall sprinted toward the aftermath. Cameras zoomed in immediately, broadcasting to millions the sight of Charles Leclerc stepping out of the battered Ferrari, his posture rigid, his hands curled into trembling fists. The visor on his helmet remained down, hiding the storm that was surely brewing beneath it, but his every movement spoke of rage, disbelief, and the kind of burning frustration that no words could fully contain. Leclerc walked back toward the Ferrari garage with the stiff mechanical gait of someone fighting an overwhelming urge to scream. Mechanics parted like a wave before him, some trying to meet his eyes and immediately looking away, others pretending to focus on meaningless tasks just to avoid the confrontation they knew was coming. Behind the sealed doors of the Ferrari compound, the explosion happened. According to someone close to the scene, Leclerc ripped off his gloves and slammed them onto the debrief table with a force that made several engineers jump. "I trusted you to clear me," he barked, his voice cracking under the strain of suppressed fury. "You told me go, you told me safe. Where was the judgment? Where was the caution?" His race engineer, a veteran of many seasons, attempted to explain, but Leclerc cut him off mid-sentence, fists pounding the table, causing coffee cups and data tablets to rattle. Across the compound, a secondary meeting between Ferrari's strategy director and team principal was spiraling into a barely contained shouting match. Overheard snippets caught fragments like, "unacceptable margin," and "this isn't karting, this is Formula One." Meanwhile, an emergency review of pit release protocols began without ceremony, engineers staring at screens, mouths thin and grim. One junior strategist reportedly muttered under his breath, "We threw him to the wolves," before hastily being shushed by a senior official. The official Ferrari statement that emerged a few hours later, cold, clinical, stripped of emotion, cited a timing misalignment, but avoided assigning specific blame. It was the kind of statement that satisfied no one and angered everyone. Fans didn't hesitate to respond. In mere minutes, social media platforms were an unstoppable tidal wave of outrage, suspicion, and obsession. #Hamilton Crash wasn't just trending, it was dominating global conversations. Experts, former drivers, YouTube analysts, and armchair critics alike dissected the incident from every conceivable angle. Frame-by-frame analyses flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, showing how narrowly the two cars missed a full-impact crash that could have turned catastrophic. One viral post claimed to have uncovered audio distortion in Ferrari's team radio communications, suggesting vital words were either clipped or omitted at a crucial moment. Another theorized that pit lane radar software, long rumored but never officially confirmed, had misfired due to unexpected electromagnetic interference. Conspiracy theories exploded across the internet. Some said Ferrari had deliberately risked the release, gambling that Hamilton would lift off instinctively. Others whispered that it was Mercedes playing a deeper game, releasing Hamilton in a way that would rattle Leclerc psychologically before the championship decider. While the fans raged online, Toto Wolff was seen moving with a terrifying, deliberate urgency around the Mercedes garage. He wasn't storming or shouting. No, his anger was quieter, more dangerous. He paced with his phone glued to his ear, giving clipped, furious instructions to unseen FIA officials. "You call that a race control? You call that safe?" He was heard snarling during one particularly heated call. Later, when he spoke to assembled media, his eyes gleamed with an intensity that sent shivers through the reporters. "This was not racing," he said. "This was Russian roulette at 300 kilometers an hour." Inside Mercedes' engineering bay, Hamilton sat alone, still suited, still helmeted, staring at the telemetry screen but seeing none of it. A senior engineer tried to offer him a tablet for review, but Hamilton waved it away. Eventually, he broke his silence, speaking softly, each word weighed down by exhaustion. "They pulled the trigger," he said. And this time, it clicked. Telemetry data later revealed that Hamilton's W15 had been outfitted with an experimental diffuser setup designed to maximize low-speed grip without sacrificing straight-line speed. The engineering team had been cautiously optimistic about its effectiveness, but now whispers circulated that the new system, combined with the collision shock, had triggered a violent oscillation in the rear suspension geometry. One source described the moment of spin as like cutting the string on a marionette mid-step. The whole structure collapses unpredictably. Within the tightly sealed walls of the driver's debriefing, the mood was poisonous. George Russell slammed his notebook closed with enough force to startle Logan Sargent nearby. "Pit releases are supposed to be sacred," Russell muttered bitterly. "We trust them with our lives." Fernando Alonso, lounging casually but with sharp eyes taking in every word, laughed a low, humorless laugh. "Sacred," he said. "Nothing is sacred when there's a championship at stake." Lando Norris leaned in toward Oscar Piastri, whispering under his breath. "They're gonna pretend it was a mistake. Watch. They'll say it's a racing incident, and sweep it under the rug." Piastri, young but already wise to the politics of the sport, nodded grimly. "Same as always. It's not about safety. It's about who screams louder behind closed doors." At Red Bull's motorhome, Christian Horner had already seized the narrative. With a casual smirk, he told reporters, "When you play at the edge, eventually someone falls off. It's just a question of who and when." His words, innocent enough on the surface, dripped with venom for those who knew how to listen. Max Verstappen, standing a few meters behind, simply shook his head and muttered to his trainer, "It's a war now. No one's safe." By midnight, the FIA had announced a full investigation, not just into Ferrari's pit release timing, but into overall pit lane safety standards for the entire championship season. Multiple team bosses were summoned to emergency meetings, their faces tight and weary as they walked into the glare of the FIA mobile command center. Leaked emails suggested the scope of the investigation would reach back to earlier races where pit lane incidents had been quietly dismissed. A parallel investigation, reportedly pushed by Wolff himself, demanded a forensic analysis of pit release signals, team radio encryption integrity, and even electromagnetic field anomalies around the pit complex. Mercedes requested independent telemetry audits from third-party specialists, raising the stakes from mere racing protest to near-legal warfare. Meanwhile, in fan circles, theories continued to spiral. Some claimed Hamilton's spin was so exaggerated it suggested deliberate car sabotage. Others insisted Leclerc had been sent out specifically to trigger an incident and reshuffle the race order in Ferrari's favor. Wild accusations that mechanics had pre-positioned Hamilton's pit stop for maximum interference swirled unchecked across Reddit and Twitter. It wasn't just a crash anymore. It was a flashpoint. A fault line that exposed the growing cracks beneath the glamorous surface of Formula One. Every team, every driver, every engineer now looked at each other a little differently. Trust was broken. Paranoia was blooming. And with 3 races left in the most tightly contested championship in a decade, Everyone knew the truth no one dared say out loud. This was only the beginning. By the time dawn approached, casting a cold light over a paddock that had barely slept, the only certainty was that Formula One would never be the same again. Not after this. The minutes after the crash were suffocating. The paddock, normally buzzing with the endless chatter of mechanics and the thrum of engines, fell into a heavy, stunned silence. It was the kind of silence that seems to stretch time itself, a collective breath held hostage by disbelief. No one moved, no one spoke louder than a whisper, as the battered Mercedes was hoisted onto the emergency transport, a pitiful sight compared to the magnificent machine it had been mere hours before. Around it, the Mercedes crew looked frozen, as if some invisible blow had struck them too. It wasn't just the car that had been broken, it was the spirit of a team that had fought so hard to claw back into relevance this season. Inside the garage, Toto Wolff's face was a portrait of rage barely contained by professionalism. His knuckles whitened around the phone clamped to his ear, his voice low and cutting. "I want answers. Not excuses. Find out exactly what failed and why. I don't want speculation. I want certainty." He slammed the phone down on the nearest surface, the crash echoing off the walls and causing a young engineer to flinch. Near him, James Allison barked a series of terse orders, dispatching teams to prepare not just repairs, but contingency plans, replacement parts, alternate scenarios they hadn't dared think about before tonight. But even as the machine was spirited away under layers of tarp and secrecy, the real drama was unfolding far from the track. Lewis Hamilton, the living legend, the indomitable warrior of the modern era, was battling not just physical pain but the possibility that he might be watching Miami from a hospital bed instead of a cockpit. Flown by private jet to a secret medical facility, he was ushered through hidden corridors, shielded from prying eyes and cameras desperate for a glimpse of the wounded champion. Angela Cullen, his loyal performance coach, never left his side, her usual calm replaced by grim determination. Behind closed doors, the prognosis wasn't optimistic. A dislocated rib, deep muscle bruising, possible microfractures in his lower back. Injuries that, under normal circumstances, would demand weeks, months even, of recovery. The chief physician, an elderly man with the clinical detachment of someone who had seen it all, leaned over Hamilton's bed and said quietly, "Lewis, if you race like this, you could cause permanent damage. You could end your career tonight." Hamilton, his face pale but his eyes burning with undiminished fire, responded without hesitation, "Then I race like it's my last." Angela, barely keeping her voice steady, tried to reason with him. "Lewis, you don't have to prove anything. You've done more than anyone in the history of this sport. You don't owe them this." Hamilton shook his head slowly, grimacing with the effort. "I don't race for them. I race because it's who I am. Because it's what I was born to do. They think they've seen everything I have to give? They haven't seen anything yet." As he spoke, miles away in Miami, the narrative was already shifting. Red Bull strategists were furiously recalculating tire models, assuming Mercedes would have to withdraw one car. Christian Horner, in a private meeting with Max Verstappen and the senior engineers, reportedly said, "We treat this like a wounded animal. More dangerous now than ever. They'll gamble everything because they have nothing left to lose." Max, ever the cold tactician, shrugged with the careless arrogance of a man who knows destiny favors the bold. If Hamilton shows up, good. If he doesn't, better. Either way, the title's already decided. He just doesn't know it yet. Ferrari, too, sensed blood in the water. Charles Leclerc, usually so polished and diplomatic, was overheard telling a teammate in hushed tones, "We need to crush them now, before he has a chance to come back stronger. If Hamilton's wounded, we can't show mercy. This is war." In the media centers, journalists scrambled to piece together any sliver of information. Twitter exploded with fake photos: Hamilton in a neck brace, Hamilton boarding a wheelchair, Hamilton giving a thumbs up from a hospital bed. None were verified. All were believed. The public couldn't get enough. Conspiracies bred like wildfire. Had Mercedes sabotaged him to make room for a new driver? Was this karma for 2021? Was it a stunt to boost Netflix ratings? Meanwhile, back in London, in a dimly lit rehabilitation suite, Hamilton stood for the first time since the crash, every movement stiff, deliberate. He winced with every breath, his body screaming in protest, but he refused assistance. The doctors insisted he remain, but Lewis Hamilton had already made up his mind. He would race in Miami, or he would fall trying. Within hours, Mercedes' logistics teams sprang into action. The backup chassis, previously gathering dust as a last resort, was prepared with military precision. Engineers worked in shifts, stripping down components, replacing anything remotely suspect. No chances would be taken. The car that Hamilton would drive, if he could drive, would be a machine as perfect as human hands could make it. The private jet left Luton Airport under cover of darkness, a skeleton crew on board, and one stubborn battle-scarred gladiator staring out the window at the endless sky. As the Miami sunrise bathed the paddock in gold, tension hung so thick it was almost visible. Reporters clustered by the Mercedes hospitality suite, camera crews staking out every entrance like vultures. Rumors flew, he was already in the paddock. He had pulled out last minute. He was being wheeled in through the back entrance. And then, like a scene out of cinema, he appeared. Hamilton, dressed not in team gear but in an immaculate white suit, sunglasses masking his eyes, walked through the gates with the deliberate predatory grace of a man who knew every camera in the world was locked on him. The crowd didn't cheer immediately. There was a moment of stunned awe, a ripple of disbelief. Then the roar came, a wave of sound so loud it rattled windows and shook the asphalt. Every rival team turned to look. Verstappen paused mid-sentence. Leclerc dropped his phone. Wolff, watching from the Mercedes garage, smiled a smile that was not happiness but something far, far more dangerous: vengeance. Hamilton walked straight to the Mercedes pit wall, where his mechanics greeted him with stunned silence. No words were needed. He simply nodded once, a simple gesture that said, "I'm here. I'm ready. Let's finish what we started." And as he strapped himself into the rebuilt machine, every eye in the world fixed on him, Lewis Hamilton wasn't just a driver anymore. He was a storm. He was a reckoning. He was the embodiment of every impossible dream, every desperate hope, every furious refusal to accept the end without a fight. The engines roared to life. The lights began their countdown. And somewhere, deep in the soul of Formula One, a new legend was born.